Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Energy Markets Podcast. It is the 14th of November, and we have Brent crude oil trading a little bit down this morning in Asia, down about 0.5% at 71.86. Still kind of stuck in a pretty tight range, 71 and a bit, then bounces up to 72 and then back down again, and so forth. So Brent crude oil and oil in general looking a little bit in search of some direction at the moment, and where indeed will it find that direction is the question that many are asking. Let's kick off this morning with Dr. Andre Belyi, a professor, a founder and CEO of Balancen in Estonia. Dr. Andre, one of the things we've been sort of asking this week as we see the new Trump administration in the United States start to appoint its political leaders, its cabinet, it puts out its policies and its posture. We're starting to look at, well, how is the world going to react to that? You know, how is China going to react to 50% sanctions and so forth? I'm wondering from your corner of the world in Estonia, of course, right on the doorstep of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the very vulnerable Baltic states. How do you think that region is going to react to what seems to be the political intention of the new Trump administration to stop supporting Ukraine?
I think Andrew's gone.
Andrew got disconnected.
Well, after that big question, we'll go elsewhere. Let's go to Bahrain. Dr. Omar El Beidly, Director of Research, Bahrain Center for Strategic International and Energy Studies. Omar, your thoughts? Same question, different neighborhood. The policies, the foreign policy team of the Trump administration is now has been unveiled with Marco Rubio and Secretary of State and some others there, National Security, UN Ambassador. All looks very, very unfamiliar in a way. Your thoughts on how this is likely to impact the current macro geopolitical picture in the region and the reaction to it?
Well, I think that there's two big questions. The first is what's going to happen to the relationship between the US and Iran? Is the US going to revert to the maximum, let's be frank, failed maximum pressure strategy under the previous Trump administration? And is there going to be some new instrument deployed in that maximum pressure? And on this occasion, unlike the previous occasion, there's a lot more sympathy towards Iran from its Gulf neighbors, which makes the political calculus a little bit more convoluted. And then the other issue is, you know, it's clear there's a whole bunch of Israelophiles in the foreign policy team and defense team and so on of Trump, and that creates a bit of a sort of, you know, there's two opposing forces. On the one hand, Israel wants a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia, and on the other hand, Saudi Arabia wants a Palestinian state. At least these are the ostensible positions of both sides. And then Israel is vehemently opposed, at least the administration is, to a Palestinian state. So I'm sure a lot of effort will be exerted to square that circle, but I think ultimately it won't result in what Trump and his colleagues are aiming for. But during that process, there'll be a lot of uncertainty, a lot of pushing and throwing, a lot of tumult, and expect the militias and non-state actors in the region to be trying to ensure that the chips land in their favor.
Just picking up on that, I mean, the unknown and the non-state actors, the larger sort of picture, the sort of sovereign state frame. We just had the Arab Muslim conference of leaders in Saudi Arabia the last weekend, looking at obviously all of the regional issues, and particularly as it relates to the Israel's wars in the region. Your thoughts on the outcome from that? It's not the most authoritative body in the world, but it does carry the opinion of a very large number of people in the world. Your thoughts on the outcome of that meeting, and does it indicate any direction of travel with a new Trump administration coming in?
So there's two important conclusions. The first is that Saudi Arabia took the opportunity to express friendly language towards Iran, which further, affirms that the Saudi Arabia is not interested in sort of escalation towards Iran. And secondly, Saudi Arabia took the opportunity to take a very strong position against Israel. They described Israel's activities in Palestine as a genocide, which they didn't need to. And so the ball is very much in the US's court. If it wants to get a Saudi-Israeli peace treaty, the price has gone up, so to speak. That's the signal coming out of it. And there was reciprocal. I mean, Iran released a statement saying they appreciated the summit's conclusion in favor of, it's the summit's condemnation of Israeli attacks on Iran. And so, at the moment, it looks like that block is sort of holding, but it's all very fragile, and the non-state actors can turn this upside down in the blink of an eye, and expect many twists and turns in the coming months.
Thank you. Dr. Andre, welcome back. I'm not sure if you heard my question, but I was just asking, we've been exploring this week. Inevitably, we've been all been exposed to the headlines just overnight. The Trump administration has captured, or the Republicans have captured the House of Representatives as well. So they have the full government. And we've been sort of analyzing their policies and their appointments and looking at how the different stakeholders around the world are likely to react to those new policies coming out of Washington. And of course, one of the big ones, and looks like one of the central ones for their early engagement, is to stop supporting Ukraine in the same way that the current administration does. And your thoughts on how the region where you are in Estonia, the Baltic states, and the NATO alliance, etc., are likely to respond to that. Will that be the end of the war? Is 1 and 1 2 here, that without the US support, that the war has to end, or at least the Ukrainians' ability to fight it? Your thoughts on how the region will respond to the policies of this new administration?
Well, first of all, we don't know whether Trump will cease to support Ukraine. There are mixed signals from the Republican Party, from those who is now nominating around him. So we don't know what's going to be. Certainly, there is a kind of plan or hope to provide a sort of peace deal, but I mean, it comes from Washington. It doesn't necessarily mean that regional stakeholders, including Moscow, maybe mainly Moscow, will accept it. And now there is a sentiment that the U.S. administration puts itself in a way that they are more dependent on Russia, that actually they're more needed in Russia's consent rather than the other way around, and that is definitely maybe may create an instability in the near future. Look, for example, Trump draws lines on the borders, says here how it should go, but then Moscow doesn't accept it. So what's next? Yeah, and then of course I wouldn't exclude a comeback of more hawkish approach in case if, for example, regional stakeholders don't agree on Trump's terms. So I would not rush so much in saying that there is a sort of peace deal there, but who knows? Who knows? And what is the sentiment? There are also positive sentiments that there are more LNG that will come in, and that certainly creates a feeling that energy security is ensured from the US side. So we had very mixed signals from Biden about it, with the Biden export pause. Now it's all removed, and certainly it creates a positive signal. And it's also a sort of security guarantee that many regional stakeholders consider. The more we buy, the more we are related with the United States, the more we are sure that the United States see Europe in general as an added value, and therefore it would be unlikely to leave NATO and so on. But again, more unpredictabilities are likely, so I would say there are geopolitical concerns and risks.
Salah Yilmaz, Senior Energy Equity Analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. We've been discussing there, Salah, of course, the geopolitical tensions and issues in the Middle East and in Europe, and the outcome of which could affect energy flows, but depending on how Trump and his administration targets their policies and how effective they are in seeing them through. The other big policy that has an impact on flows, of course, is his infamous phrase. I'm not sure if he coined it, but nonetheless, he owns it. Drill, baby, drill. Ultimately, sees the American energy industry and the energy independence and more energy and oil and gas production and less support for renewables. Your thoughts, Senior Energy Equity Analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence, you get paid the big bucks to answer this question, I would think. Will the American majors respond to this drill, baby, drill policy and start to produce a lot more oil in the United States? Your thoughts on how the new administration's energy policy is likely to land with the major oil producers in America?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. I mean, my take is that not really. I mean, when we look at the US domestic production historically in the last decade or so, I think it was more the level of price, the benchmark price, and company strategy that determined what these companies do rather than the administration. Because when you look at just the history and different administrations, the trend didn't really change. And I think it was more important what the company management thought the shareholders wanted. So that's why, I mean, the way I've been trying to break down the price impact that we've seen since Trump was elected, I saw three main reasons, the three main downside catalysts for prices that have been pressuring prices. One was, and I think this was the most important one, was more tariffs. Of course, this would mean less global trade. This would mean lower oil demand and lower oil prices. So that's one downside catalyst. The second one I've been looking at is stronger dollar. I think this was essentially part of the Trump trade, which meant given his policies, inflation will probably have to stay higher for a little bit longer. Interest rates, the back end of the curve, is going to probably stay a little bit higher for longer, and then that means stronger dollar, which would be pressuring prices. So after those two, I see the drill, baby, drill, and perhaps higher US production as one of the reasons perhaps why the market and analysts and investors may think that we will have lower prices. But again, when I look at these companies, and I mean, the US companies are not in my coverage, but still, when we look at what our colleagues in the US have been saying, I mean, these companies are still very much focused a lot more on shareholder returns over growth. And I don't see that changing necessarily because the administration changes now. I mean, if anything, now they have to reckon with a lower benchmark oil and gas price than a couple of years ago. So I think that's more important in these companies' decision-making than the administration. And of course, I mean, I think perhaps this will be more impactful on natural gas and LNG licensing and authorization. But when I purely look at oil, I don't think, and if I were to rank these three downside catalysts, I would put the impact of the drill, baby, drill and higher US domestic production as the third most important one.
Omar, just picking up on that, of course, one of the major challenges for OPEC Plus over the last decade or more has been, I mean, the doubling, nearly tripling of U.S. oil production from the 2005-6 time frame to 10, 12 years later, and it's still growing. We had a record again this year. Your thoughts on how OPEC Plus is likely to coexist and accommodate this drill, Bailey, drill policy of the US government? Because they do stand slightly on opposing sides, but ultimately there's one market they've all got to share. Your thoughts on how this is likely to play out?
Well, so I think ironically, it could be something that contributes to, greater cohesion within OPEC. Historically, by having the market largely to themselves, that creates tensions and opportunities for cheating, which Saudi Arabia would have been willing to tolerate. But now they control a smaller percentage of the market. They're at the whims of US shale oil producers. And so I think they realize how quickly this can all go down the drain, and they should have a much higher motivation to work together and coordinate. So although ultimately in the aggregate sense, their hand is weakened, if they can coordinate more effectively, that would be in their favor, because ultimately, if you actually look at compliance rates in OPEC, historically, they're pretty awful. And Saudi Arabia is really only the major one who's been willing to take the hit for the team. So I think we could be ironically entering a period of greater coordination and compliance within OPEC. What it will mean in the large scheme of things remains to be seen, because there's a big question mark over, the cost structure of shale oil and how they will respond to, variations in global oil prices. But I do think that, in general, you'll find more discipline. And again, this is going back to the Iran issue. This is something where the, détente between Saudi Arabia and Iran plays in their favor. All of the oil producers are either in the neutral club or in the bad boys club. And we'll be happy to collaborate against the drill, baby drill, specter that is looming from DC.
Dr. Andre, looking at the same sort of situation in Europe, and of course, in your earlier point, you made it clear as well that the energy flowing from Russia to Europe has never stopped, while it has dropped significantly, and the United States energy has been a big winner, if you want to call it that way, in the market opportunity of Europe with the turning away from Russia. If we take the policies of the Trump and all of the individuals that have been appointed, what they've said about this war in recent times and funding it and so forth, the probability is that they will be stepping back from that policy. Do you think, or how do you see the rehabilitation of the Europe-Russia energy partnership, which of course, again, just to repeat, has never stopped? There's still gas flowing through Ukraine. There's still LNG flowing from Russia to Europe. What are your thoughts on how it could return, the rehabilitation of the energy partnership between Europe and Russia?
Well, I think it's not that easy to answer. First, we have to see the hostilities in Ukraine to be ceased. Second, we have to see normalization of Moscow-Brussels relations back. And that cannot be envisaged without at least formal change in the discourses that we are hearing in Moscow, because there are two sides of the story, not one side. And when you are hearing from Moscow that Europe is the main adversary and we don't want to treat with Europe, then of course the question is that even if there is a certain end in the active phase of war in Ukraine, whether the partnership will be resumed, I would have very strong doubts. There is also a loss of trust in the European gas business, mainly because they did trust Moscow that they will not actually make something stupid. And remember, before 2022, when Germans were arguing for Nord Stream 2, they were saying, look, it's a pure business. don't think about geopolitics. And then Moscow sent a signal that it is actually geopolitics. And then, of course, German business was locked somehow in the contradiction and being currently accused of all the troubles. So automatically the trust is lost. So you see that actually from both sides, it will take time to actually resume anything in terms of like genuine energy partnership, and probably it will never go back, because at the end of the day, politics impact the economics very often more than the other way around. And let's see what's going to happen with the US, whether US LNG will be in surplus, and in this case the price will go down, and then in this case business will also be on the side of higher diversification from Russian side.
Salah, putting everything else aside, and we've talked obviously a lot about the politics of the world and the changing administrations, but pure price. I mean, we are now finishing a year with oil Brent closer to $70 a barrel. The average for the year still closer to 80, but the trend line looks downward for next year. How is that likely to impact the decisions that the majors are making regarding future investments and capex? Are they going to regret that they've returned so much money to shareholders and haven't kept a bigger sort of capital availability?
No, I don't think so. I think a big part of the shareholder returns were buybacks in the case of a lot of the global oil majors, with a couple of exceptions. And we have been arguing for a few months now that probably the share buybacks by the majors have maxed out. And I mean, as you said, it's becoming clear that, you know, benchmark oil and gas prices are going down, are probably going to be relatively low for next year. But not only that, refining margins have been normalizing, and the outlook for next year is also for them to remain roughly stable or even potentially a little bit lower. So we think that, I mean, usually the lever that these companies go to are buybacks when things are good, and that's exactly what happened. And from here onwards, we do expect the pace of these buybacks to decelerate. And, you know, I mean, oil price curve is still backwardated. So the back end of the curve is slightly lower still, which is generally where these companies operate. These are the numbers that they look at when they take investment decisions and when they take strategic decisions with their shareholder returns. So when we look at the next year, the outlook for next year, I think as we've gotten closer to the end of the year, of course, next year's market balance was what people were very much focused on, and it's become more and more clear that demand has been stuttering this year, and it looks like next year we're not necessarily going to see a huge uptick, and at the same time, the supply outside of OPEC Plus has proven quite robust. So when you put those two together, there really seems to be very little or no room for OPEC Plus to bring any barrels back into the market, which puts them in a very difficult position, which makes the next decision by them at the beginning of next month very important. But when you put it all together, it's a very difficult position for OPEC Plus, and it's a position for the oil market where as I said earlier, there are probably a few more downside catalysts than upside catalysts, which I think combine to form this, perhaps underwhelming outlook for next year.
Let's go to the survey question, which sort of looks at some of the themes we've been discussing, and that is, what will have the biggest impact on the direction of oil prices through the end of the year? And of course, we're pretty much there, but nonetheless, the sentiment in the market we've seen in recent times, most notably in the month of October last month, that the oil price spiked up on geopolitics and then came back down again. We've seen China stimulus when it has shown its teeth of being impactful. It could move the needle on the direction of oil price. Of course, the next big OPEC plus meeting is only a few weeks away. Their policy decisions for the new year. Or as we're hearing every hour of every day now, Trump's plans, his latest appointments, etc. So which of these do you think has the biggest impact on the direction of oil prices through the end of the year? We sort of take a view on that. Omar, looking at this end of year, which of course is also the end of the Biden administration, the conflict, Israel's invasion of Gaza and Lebanon are both doing the opposite. I mean, they're heating up. They seem to be getting, if they could even get worse, certainly in Gaza, they do seem to be. Lebanon the same. And yet we see backdrop headlines that, oh no, we're near, there's a ceasefire. Is there anything remotely in the ether, do you think, that could see these active live conflicts settle down before the end of the Biden administration?
Well, I mean, in armed combat, it's normal for there to be a surge when there's an expectation of a resolution. And I remember in the World War I, just before the armistice, in a few hours between the 11, the dawn, the signing, and 11, there was a lot of attempts to grab as much land as you could. So yeah, the escalation is actually potentially consistent with a tacit order to get whatever you can now, because in January, the fun and games, so to speak, from the Trump's perspective, are going to be over. Or it could be the fact that it could be a way of demonstrating to Trump that a defiance, a sort of, we're going to continue fighting whether you try to get peace or not. My sense is that both conflicts are going to wind down, although probably not quite as rapidly in the 24-hour sense as Trump declared. But again, we go back to the big wild card. We're still waiting for Iran's response to Israel's attacks, and we're still waiting to see what the various other non-state actors in the region are going to be doing. It's still a powder keg. There's still lots of unknowns. The only thing we've really resolved is now we know that Trump and his team are going to be in charge, and it's going to be a team full of Israelophiles. And that's not really a thing that's likely to be a conduit to greater peace and de-escalation of conflict in the region. So I think that, unfortunately, although I think the superficially the conflicts will wind down, I think the depth of discord in the region is going to continue escalating, and it's going to be a tough 4 to 5 years in the Middle East.
Dr. Andre, your thoughts again and from a European perspective. We have Germany looking at its going to elections now with the government there that has collapsed. Of course, Germany is the critical country within the European Union, alongside obviously some others, but ultimately Germany is the big financial engine of the union. Your thoughts on where Europe can move while Germany remains in this sort of limbo, and how long that limbo will last?
I don't have a crystal ball to answer this one.
Yeah.
We are in political crisis, and I think that the European establishment or establishment in majority of European countries recognizes that there is a certain political crisis. Of course, any crisis is always relative. It's not a crisis which leads, to collapse of society or towards civil war, but it's a crisis where there is a growing distrust from public opinions towards the so-called mainstream policies that also includes various environmental and energy policies. And for one reason or another, we see that across European countries, let's say, non-mainstream parties are gaining upper hand, and there is no single case. Well, there are probably some cases that I didn't follow, but most of the cases we see more populist forces who are gaining. I mean, let's take Netherlands, France, Austria. Each time they come number one. Then the other question is how the coalition is built and how they are included or not in the government. But there is this wave, and this wave is also currently this week and next week is considered during the European Parliament hearings, because now European Parliament is confirming new commissioners, and one of the most controversial one comes from Spain, from the socialist camp, a former or outgoing Minister of Economy of Spain, and many right or center-right, centrist politicians or parliamentarians don't want her to be there, and that creates a major friction within the European Parliament, and that also reflects the current political crisis that is actually happening in Europe.
Salah, I wanted to get your thoughts as a wrap-up. One of the consequences of this new Trump policy, much more favorable to the hydrocarbon industry in the United States, is, of course, one of the reasons why the U.S. hydrocarbon industry supported him, and the benefits attached to lighter regulation and so forth. Whether they drill, baby, drill or not, they're going to enjoy a less onerous and challenging regulatory environment, which their European counterparts will not. And I'm just wondering, we've heard in recent times the noise from the European majors that maybe we should be listing in the US. Shell has put the UK on warning that they might look at moving their listing. How do you think, or how would you see any play out there? The US majors, who already benefit from a share price premium given the context in the United States over their European counterparts, and now may enjoy even greater one, playing into some of these decisions?
You're absolutely right. I mean, we are seeing a pretty clear divergence in valuation. When you look at PE or EV/EBITDA, there's a clear valuation gap between the US majors and the European ones. It was actually TotalEnergies who I think floated the idea of listing in the US because, and I think generally the thought is that, there seems to be a little bit more confidence in the oil space and in oil demand growth in the US, and this is obviously being reflected in the strategies of some of these US majors compared to the European ones. And I think, and I do agree with you that with Trump and his pro-fossil fuel stance, this can the divergence can get even greater, which might nudge some of these European majors to consider it. Again, I only heard TotalEnergies talk about it. I mean, clearly, I don't think Emmanuel Macron was necessarily happy about that, given TotalEnergies is one of the largest companies in France and obviously very important for France. But in one of his interviews, the TotalEnergies CEO said, I mean, it's kind of purely business, right? I mean, if there is such a big difference in valuation and if it would be better for the company, they would consider doing so. So I think it's an interesting thought, and I do agree with you that this can only make them consider such a move for their listing from somewhere in Europe to the US even more.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Brent crude oil, there's our answer. Stimulus, China stimulus still maybe the biggest impact. OPEC policies, Trump plans, not so much. Geopolitics, not at all. We'll post that on social. And
we've got option number 5, which is the Gulf Intelligence Podcast. That's the real market.
That's it right there. It should have been number 1, right? Omar, thank you so much as always for your thoughts. Salah as well, great to have your insights. And Dr. Andre, wonderful to have you back, and look forward to seeing you all soon again. Have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.